We are here at Serralves in the exhibition of my publications, curated by Joseph Grigley on invitation of Philippe Vernier, the director of the Serralves Museum. And actually, when Philippe called me about 2 years ago and suggested that we could do an exhibition here of my curatorial kind of publications, that I thought it would be fantastic to involve Joseph, because of course the incredible artist Joseph Grigley, with whom I've worked a lot over the years, has since the second half of the 90s archived all my publications. And the idea was actually, the very unusual idea was that he as an artist decided to archive a curator. He's done this before actually with an art critic, with Gregory Baddock, and decided to do this with my work. And so I started really 25 years ago to send Joseph always a copy of everything I do. I always send one copy to my mother and one copy to Joseph, so 2 boxes left at the same time. So there is a kind of a parallel archive of my publications also in Switzerland. And that sort of includes, of course, solo shows I would curate, group shows I would curate, books I would write, lectures I would do, things I would do on social media, just any form of publication, any kind of instances where the work gets published. Was always sent in what I call the Grigley box, the magical kind of Grigley box to Chicago. Initially, it usually took a few months to fill a box, and then I would say over the last 10, 15 years, when my output increased, it sort of was a box every month. And Joseph would work actually with a group of students in Chicago at the School of the Art Institute in a specially dedicated room for this project, on small vitrine exhibitions, but also different forms of classifying the archive, new novel forms of doing bibliography, combining the digital and the virtual. It's kind of a mixed reality project, one can say. These publications have a lot to do with mixed reality. And so, yeah, we thought it would be amazing, following Philippe's invitation, to actually here in this archive section of the museum adjacent to the library downstairs, to sort of show these publications. And it's of course particularly fascinating also because there is such an incredible collection here of artist books brought together by the late Guy Schrennen, who has been the curator here for artist publications. And I think there's a very interesting possibility now for the visitors here to see in the archive these 60s, 70s kind of generations artist books and how they worked with it. And then sort of through the exhibition here, see how a generation of artists of my generation of the 90s used the artist book in a similar yet very different way. And we decided also to kind of focus on exhibitions, and the way how actually the publications of these exhibitions are not secondary kind of documentation, but very often are printed matter exhibitions, and inspired very much by Lucy Lippard and her catalog, where the exhibition was a postcard for Seattle, a postcard box, and each artist kind of wrote an instruction. That very much inspired my Do It project. So we have here the archive of Do It, the many different publications, the reiterations of Do It, but also original manuscripts of Do It pieces. And that's an exhibition where artists, we developed it with Boltanski and Lavier in 1993, where artists over the last 28 years have written DIY pieces, and they have been interpreted in more than 160 cities all over the world. So it's very much the exhibition as a living organism. And this exhibition here, this presentation of 9 months of my publications curated by Joseph, is also a living organism with many different feedback loops. Every month new elements will be added, new vitrine exhibitions will come. So what we see today is basically just the beginning. And I suppose this interest in books, has started very early for me, because the first, so to say, museum, the first archive my parents took me to was the monastery library in St. Gallen. It's a large Baroque hall from the 17th century, which actually includes certain books dating back to the Middle Ages. It has the very famous plan of St. Gall, the St. Gall plan, which is the design of the monastic cloister from the 10th, 11th century. And, for me as a child, when I was like 9, 10 years old, to go to this library and to time travel into the past, but then also in my mind into the future by almost like 1,000 years, was incredibly inspiring. And to even physically be able, with gloves, to actually touch these medieval manuscripts, I think it created a connection to the book which has never gone away. Now, I think one thing which is maybe to be mentioned is this idea that, of course, the 90s were also a period where the art world became much, much more global. And I felt that on the one hand, we needed to sort of resist the homogenizing forces of globalization, because obviously they lead, it means that a lot of things disappear, species disappear. It led to the looming ecological disaster, but the extinction crisis, but also cultural phenomena disappear, languages disappear at enormous pace, and even something like handwriting becomes, threatened. And so I basically, part of my work is about resisting, these homogenizing forces, and that's, we have here the handwriting project, a more recent project of my Instagram, where I, inspired by Etel Adnan and also Umberto Eco, decided to launch a movement to celebrate handwriting and doodling every day, and I post every day a handwritten note or a doodle by an artist. At the same time, we have these, stamps, which have also to do with handwriting. So in a way, the idea of resisting homogenizing forces which lead to extinction and to disappearing things is part of the work. Memory is, of course, also part of that, because obviously, we live in a world where there is more and more information, but that does not necessarily mean that we also have more memory. So maybe but actually amnesia could very well be somewhere at the core of this digital age, which is, of course, also why I record all these conversations. They have to do with, hopefully sort of something like dynamic memory. But then there is the second aspect, which, and Edouard Glissant always talked about that. We have the homogenized globalization, but we have also ever-growing counter-reaction to globalization, and that's also got to be resisted. Glissant talked about this, lack of solidarity, about, and we can see this in new forms of nationalism, new forms of localism. Bernard Stiegler told me in our last conversation, we need to find ways to be local without being localists. And so this idea actually of also resisting these, new counter-reactions which have to do with a lack of solidarity, with new nationalisms which has been exacerbated actually through the COVID time, is, I think, a second aspect. So I would say these are the sort of two main things, and I think within that the exhibitions developed, and we're going to show lots of different examples of exhibitions as archives, as exhibitions, as publishing experiments. To begin with, we have the kitchen show. My first exhibition happened in the kitchen, because I wanted to do an exhibition where one wouldn't expect it. At the same time, I also at that time as a student didn't have any other spaces available. It's the kitchen of my student apartment is what I had, so it's kind of a DIY approach. And so I invited Christian Boltanski, with whom we developed the idea, and Fischli Weiss, and many other artists. Also Frédéric Pauly-Boabre sent drawings from Abidjan about the kitchen and roses and coffee, and so there were these regular arrivals of kitchen drawings. Boltanski projected a candle where usually the garbage would be, and Fischli Weiss liberated the kitchen from books and made it into a real kitchen by bringing in enormous food supplies, like 5 kilograms of noodles and 5 liters of mustard or ketchup. And these big quantities of food formed a kind of a kitchen altar where everything appeared to be too big. It's almost like when as a child, things appear really huge. So it was this experience that you entered the kitchen and everything appeared like oversized. That was the kitchen altar of Fischli Weiss. And more artists participated in this show, and we show here the publication where each artist did an original artwork. So it sounds like a mobile, it's a portable, it's a musée portable, it's a portable museum, right? A portable exhibition is this little box. At the same time, we show another case study, the hotel exhibition, where after starting to actually organize bigger exhibition, I worked with Kaspar Koenig on a big painting show for Vienna called The Broken Mirror. I had a longing to kind of go back also into a smaller space, to not lose this intimacy of the art experience. And I was always really interested when we do exhibitions in unusual contexts, like a kitchen or a hotel room or a house museum, as a matter of fact. I also curated shows for the Lorca House or for the Barragan House. Artists produce very different works which are very different from what they would do in a white cube. And so, we show, for example, all these unexpected artworks artists created for my hotel room in Paris. When I came back from the big show in Vienna, I wanted to do a big, small show. So I invited like 75 artists to exhibit in this tiny hotel room in Montparnasse, and Annette Messager would do a cover of the bed with, stuffed animals. At the same time, we'd have a radio program by Fischli Weiss. Felix González Torres actually created a piece for the bathroom. So did Dominique González Förster. We had works under the bed. We had the window, the television, like every aspect of the hotel room became an exhibit. And then I received visitors and gave every visitor, a guided tour. And here we have the documentation, a sort of whole series of photographs by the artist Pierre Le Guillaume, and also the postcard set, because every artist made a postcard. So also what is part of these exhibitions is also to think about, in a way, maybe the observation that the places in which exhibitions are presented are kind of also invisible to large sections of society, and that we need to find other forms of engagement. We need to go outside the habitual kind of engagement with art, and that, of course, is the case very strongly also with the Point d'Ironie. Again, with Boltanski, we initiated this project with Agnes B, published by Agnes B, where we basically invite regularly artists to do a double-folded poster. So it's either a magazine, but it can also be used like here as almost like wallpaper, as poster. People can sort of cover their walls at home with it. And find all kinds of other ways of using it, because we print 100,000 copies, give a carte blanche to an artist, and they do with it whatever they want. So in that sense, it's a mobile exhibition which can bring art where we expect it least. I mean, a couple of years ago I was in Japan, and I switched on the television in my hotel room, and there was a program, it was a film in Japanese. I didn't understand the word, but I saw on the wall of the room, where the hotel room where actually the film was enacted, I saw the Louis Bourgeois Point d'Ironie, with the Japanese film. So you can see it leads to the fact that art can, appear where otherwise it would never appear, and that's very much part, I would say, of my conviction curatorially, that we need to always find ways to kind of achieve that. The other thing I would say is also that it's not only, it's always interdisciplinary. I think we need to go beyond the fear of pooling knowledge and bring if you want to understand the forces in art, we need to understand what's happening in science, or try to understand what's happening in music, in literature. So it's kind of transdisciplinary, but it's also transgenerational. I mean, Grace Lee Box always says it's about bringing the generations together. So my work has often been about bringing generations together through exhibitions. Again, something which I think the way Joseph curated this show here at Serralves, that sort of, I think becomes visible. And then, of course, you have at the entrance, you have the notes, the drawing, Joseph and the group, the team of his collaborators and the students of the School of the Art Institute made. The participants really in this long ongoing project. There are generations of participants in the school over the last 25 years. And Joseph and the team made this drawing of these notes, and I think it's interesting that Carlo Rivelli wrote this new book, Helgoland, actually about quantum revolution, and says that in this subatomic world, nothing exists until it interacts with something else, and I think that's this sort of interdependence is something which is very strongly present in this room, and hopefully we're gonna, further show that over the next 9 months, and it sort of goes from the first exhibition in the kitchen to the most recent exhibition, which is another form of archive, which is my Instagram, a project where I every day post these handwritten notes and doodles on Instagram, and which visitors can follow here. One thing which is really is present throughout the last 30 years is the sort of focus on unrealized projects, right? And I've always been very interested because when I met artists as a teenager, I would meet Rosemary Trockel as a teenager when I was 17, and she said, it's wonderful that you visit all these young artists, but you should have a transgenerational approach. You should visit, there's so many amazing artists, particularly women artists, Rosemary Trockel said, who have not had the visibility they should have, And so she encouraged me from the beginning to change that, and I remember that very well. I was 17 and I went from Cologne to Vienna. And I said to the younger artists I met there, I said, Rosemary Trockel said, we need to kind of think about memory and pioneering artists who haven't had the visibility they deserve. Like it was the moment when Louis Bourgeois became visible, and Rosemary said there are so many more extraordinary artists besides Louis who should have more visibility. So I asked the young artists in Vienna, an artist like Louis Bourgeois in Vienna who needs more visibility, who deserves more visibility, whose work I have to see, and they all said, you've got to go and see Maria Lasnik, who at that time was, mostly known in Germany and Switzerland and Austria, but not, the globally well-known artist she is today, and clearly was completely underappreciated on an international level. And so that was the first time I applied the Rosemary Trockel, methodology, and I've done it ever since. That's also how I then met, many years later, Munir Sharudi Farman, with whom I worked a lot, and with whom, of course, we did the talk here at Serralves with Frank Stella. At the same time, so artists gave me different tasks. So that was Rosemary Trockel. Boltanski gave me the task to come up each time with a new rule of the game, that every exhibition needs to invent a new rule of the game. I took that to heart. And then I went to see Alighiero Boetti, because my friends Fischli Weiss said you should go to Rome and see Alighiero Boetti. So I traveled to Rome by night train, and I spent a day with Alighiero. And he said he's really irritated, because he was in his 50s, late 50s at the time, mid-late 50s. And he said, I'm always invited to do the same thing. I'm invited to do gallery shows. I'm invited to do museum shows, biennials, sometimes a public commission. But I'm never invited to do all these other things I want to do. There is no outlet for that. I have all these projects I want to work with. He had early on this idea of working with brands, right? He wanted to do something with Alitalia and have puzzles on all the airlines. And we're going to show that here as well, the puzzles of Alighiero and with Museum in Progress. And he said, no one ever wants to produce my puzzles on my puzzle exhibition. So I took that to heart, and we gave me this task, and we produced the project with Austrian Airlines. But much more than that, it became the sort of center of my methodology. Whenever I meet artists, one of the first things I ask them is, what is your unrealized project? What is the project which you haven't been able to do in the art world, in the existing institutions, galleries, biennials? And of course, the range of unrealized projects is pretty wide. There are the projects which are too big to be realized, too expensive to be realized, maybe also too time-intense to be realized. One just hasn't had the time to do them. There are also the projects which are maybe forgotten in a locker, just neglected projects. And then, of course, there are also projects which are simply kind of impossible to be realized. These are the utopic projects, or maybe partially realizable, but not fully realizable. So that's another category, the partially unrealized, partially realized projects. And then, of course, there is also the projects which have been censored. I mean, censorship is often a reason why projects couldn't happen. It can also be rejected projects, like lost competition entries. I mean, in architecture, we know a lot about unrealized projects because they're published as competitions. But actually, in art, there are less competitions, but there are also competitions for public art. So very often, the unrealized projects are unrealized public art commissions. And last but not least, Doris Lessing, when I visited her in 2006, Doris Lessing said, we should never forget there are also the projects we haven't dared to do. They're like unrealized. She called that self-censorship, right? And I think everybody has projects they would want to do but haven't yet, dared to do. So within this whole range, of the unrealized projects, it's an archive within the archive, and of course, a book has been published. It's another publication project we did with Guy Tortosa, who at the time worked at the Délégation des Arts Plastiques and was in charge of all the public commissions. So he had a great view on what are all the public artworks, which didn't happen, and we combined our two researchers. And I've done it ever since, asking artists about their unrealized project. And Joseph Grigley also decided to make that a chapter here at the exhibition at Serralves. So these are the unbuilt roads.